Support for this program provided by the Barataria Terrebonne National Estuary Program, the Louisiana Cooperative Extension Service, LSU Agricultural Center, and Louisiana Public Broadcasting.
When I started studying it, I found out that it was disappearing under my feet.
The Red Cross told coastal communities we aren't going to open any evacuation shelters south of I-10 or I-12.
It's one of the most heavily studied and monitored river systems in the world, certainly in the United States. There's a lot that we know about the river.
Every day we wait, the price tag goes up.
The science is there. All we have to do now is go and do it.
And it's not just a treasure to the state of Louisiana, it's part of the national treasure.
Water brought this land to life, and as the land dies, it returns to water. Louisiana loses more than 50 acres of land every day, a football field every 45 minutes. Lost due to a variety of reasons, some natural, but many are induced by man and made in the name of progress. Time is running out. Tough decisions must be made soon. Billions of dollars must be spent if these fertile wetlands are to be saved. Now is the time to make that decision, or one will be made that citizens of Louisiana and the nation may soon regret. The spring floods of the Mississippi River shaped much of coastal Louisiana. Millions of tons of sediment were deposited, building new land. The annual floods brought fresh water and nutrients that revitalized existing wetlands. Over time, the river would change its course as it searched for the most direct route to the Gulf of Mexico. The result of this cycle was distinct deltaic systems formed over the past 7,000 years. Mother Nature was hard at work, and the system was in balance. In less than a century, man has tipped the scale.
Land loss is not a new phenomenon to Louisiana because we've been losing land throughout geologic time. The key point before we leveed the Mississippi River is that we were building land faster than we were losing it.
Unfortunately, I think we could have done a lot better job as far as being reasonable and proper stewards of this great gift that we've been given, because we've isolated the wetlands from the river. There's no mechanism to redeposit sediments and to repair these scars that we humans have made.
The Mississippi River was leveed to control flooding and promote the transportation of commerce along the river. Leveeing was not a new practice. In the 1700s, early settlers constructed levees to protect their homes and crops. But the levees of the 20th century were much larger and based on only one model and little scientific data. The supply of sediments and nutrients was soon cut off, and areas of Louisiana began to vanish.
There are 200 million tons of sediment that are being dumped off of the continental shelf into the Gulf of Mexico every year. That's 200 million tons of soil that could be used to build Louisiana. And instead, we're filling in the Gulf of Mexico. It's a total waste.
Not only was the flow of sediments and nutrients denied, but canals dug for oil exploration and transportation allowed saltwater intrusion from the Gulf of Mexico to occur. Weakened marshes and wetlands could not stand this two-fronted attack, and areas soon began deteriorating. Ironically, the oil and gas industry is dependent upon these same wetlands for protection from waves and storm surges.
Louisiana is the energy hub for much of this country. Great preponderance of oil and gas activity that happens in our Gulf comes onshore in Louisiana or is produced in Louisiana. we're absolutely essential to the energy security of the Northeast. And we literally have thousands of pipelines and oil and gas wells that are at risk from a changing coast.
How important are these wetlands? What do they mean to the citizens of Louisiana and the nation? To many people, these areas are home. 70% of Louisiana's population lives in the coastal zone. To others, wetlands are the places they work and play. More than 50,000 people are employed in the oil and gas industry located in coastal Louisiana. Nearly twice that number ply their trade as shrimpers, oystermen, and in other fishery-related industries. The region contains 40% of the nation's coastal wetlands. In 1996, saltwater recreational fishing had a total economic impact of nearly $950 million.
Fish and wildlife resources provide $8.7 billion, that's with a B, billion dollars worth of economic impact to the state of Louisiana annually. And you wipe that out, that's big business.
Perhaps the greatest benefit offered by wetlands is their protection of both life and property. Barrier islands and coastal wetlands knock down storm surges. Storm surges, not high winds, are responsible for 90% of all hurricane fatalities. Because of wetland loss, the risk is growing every day.
The model suggests that in the next 30 years, we're going to reach a stage where we have got serious wetland deterioration issues, and we're going to find that the potential from not a Category 5, maybe not a Category 4, but a Category 3 hurricane will be a significant dollar value if it takes the right storm track.
Besides the fact that it helps reduce the storm surge, there are statistics to show that for every 2.7 miles linearly between where the Gulf is or floodwaters and where your community is, marsh can knock down flood elevation storm surges by 1 foot.
We now realize that wetlands provide protection from dangerous storms. Our coastal areas are integral to both the national and state economies and home to one of the most distinct cultures in America, yet they continue to erode away. The Barataria Terrebonne estuary system is wedged between the Mississippi and Atchafalaya rivers and extends from the Gulf of Mexico northward some 150 miles. It is home to more than 600,000 people and provides habitat for deer, bear, and migrating waterfowl. The Barataria Terrebonne system supports a substantial amount of the nation's estuarine-dependent fisheries. Commercial fishermen harvest 600 million pounds of fish and shellfish every year. Billions of dollars in oil and gas pass through or are produced in the system annually. It also contains some of the most productive agricultural lands in the country, yielding crops of sugarcane, corn, soybeans, and cotton. And no place on earth is disappearing as rapidly. Current estimates predict that by the year 2050, Louisiana will lose 640,000 acres, an area the size of Rhode Island, with the majority being in the Barataria Terrebonne system.
We would be fighting a war. We really would, to lose this much ground. You know, I don't think we've lost, I was looking, this is probably the most amount of soil lost in the United States since the succession of the southern states.
We have 40% of the coastal wetlands in the USA and 80% of the loss. What makes us so unique is the subsidence problem. Everybody else has rise in sea level, but we have subsidence on top of that.
What we've seen when we look at the images of the state today in terms of satellite images is that the land loss has taken place inside the marshes. It's not just a shoreline erosion problem. So that there are many areas where the marsh is being lost, where small ponds are expanding to larger ponds, and even larger ponds are connecting together.
Levees and man-made canals are the main reason sediments and nutrients have been denied to interior wetlands. This inside-out destructive process is the primary reason for the accelerated land loss rate in the Barataria Terrebonne estuary. Projections indicate 600 square miles of marsh and 400 square miles of swamp will be lost in the next 50 years across coastal Louisiana. Even these estimates are conservative. Sea level rise due to global climate change was not factored into the projections. With 90% of the coast less than 3 feet above sea level, a 1-foot rise would have severe ramifications, and the cost would be astronomical. Without question, the oil and gas industry is most threatened by Louisiana's deteriorating wetlands. Nearly 1/5 of the nation's oil and 1/4 of its natural gas comes from Gulf waters. With the advent of deep-water drilling technology, Port Fourchon, located in southern Lafourche Parish, is the natural jumping-off point for deep-water exploration.
Few people recognize how significant this one little dot on a map is in South Louisiana. When you're talking about, 13% of the total foreign oil, and as much as sometimes as high as perhaps 25% of domestic oil having some tie-in, you're talking close to 1/3 of this nation's energy supply could be impacted by something that happens here at Port Fourchon.
No place in the nation is better suited to serve deepwater oil and gas exploration than Port Fourchon. Located just over a mile inland, the port's facilities are at a tremendous risk to storm surges and the eroding coastline. The environmental impact of relocation would be enormous. Imagine the impact of 250 deepwater vessels having to travel 30 to 40 miles inland. Imagine having to move equipment that handles more than 80,000 tons of supplies on a daily basis. Nearly $1 billion are invested in Port Fourchon, but only a small fraction of that is being spent to preserve it. Highway 1, the main artery for economic activity in the Barataria Terrebonne system and the only road to Port Fourchon, is a substandard highway. The strain of thousands of commercial and recreational vehicles and the effect of storms and high tides have left the road in desperate need of repair. Highway 1 is also a designated hurricane evacuation route, yet there are places that are impassable due to high water from rain and high tides, even in the absence of a storm or hurricane.
The key component of getting goods here is through the highway system. We have over 1,000 trucks a day that come down into our port across this fragile highway system. If this system is cut because we don't protect our estuaries and don't have a buffer from storms, this entire system could go overnight.
The Barataria Terrebonne estuary system is one of the most productive regions in America. Not only is seafood big business, but also agricultural commodities provide jobs and generate millions of dollars in revenue. A majority of the state's $300 million sugarcane crop is grown in the Barataria Terrebonne area, along with soybeans, cotton, and corn. But seafood is still king. Commercial fisheries in Louisiana provide nearly 1/3 of the nation's total catch. The Barataria Terrebonne system alone accounted for 48% of Louisiana's total catch and 63% of the total value. More than $200 million a year and 10,000 jobs are at risk.
Coastal wetlands are some of the most productive ecosystems in the entire world. We learned early on in high school biology class that it's the coastal wetlands that are more productive than the most fertile of cornfields.
Estuaries are critical to the survival of many of the species targeted by recreational and commercial fishermen. They serve as nursery grounds, offering both food and safety during the early stages of life. Without estuaries, survival rates of organisms such as shrimp and crabs would be severely reduced. If the projections for the year 2050 are correct, the total economic effect of shrimp and crab landings alone would be reduced by $500 million a year. Recreational fisheries could expect losses of nearly $200 million annually.
These are not acres of wetlands like acres of wetlands anywhere else. These are the most productive acres of wetlands anywhere on Earth, essentially. We have the 5th largest river in the world meeting the sea here, and this is the place where most of the food chains and productivity chains for the entire Gulf of Mexico and quite possibly a good bit of the Atlantic actually gets its fuel.
Billions of dollars are at risk in Louisiana's fisheries and oil and gas industries. But if no action is taken, there is an even greater threat on the horizon. South Louisiana is home to one of the most distinct cultures in the world. The unique traditions of many different ethnic groups have flourished and become a part of Louisiana's landscape. But all of this will be lost if there is no place for it to survive. Communities will have to be abandoned when the risk from storms becomes too high and economic opportunities vanish.
If we do nothing, we're going to have a mass exodus of people from this entire system. Someone's going to pay for that, and that will probably have to be a national effort. It's cheaper to save it.
Important point to remember is the area we're looking at is very family-oriented, and that's important. Folks want to live there. They do not want any of us telling them, you have to move. Why? My daddy's daddy lived here, and I want to live here. So we need to look at that in terms of culture. There are culture changes that are significant as well.
But no one will be able to build new homes if mortgages are denied because the risk is too high. Homeowners will leave because flood insurance is no longer obtainable. No one will remain if drinking water isn't available. An irreplaceable resource will be lost forever. Louisiana and the federal government have been active in coastal restoration for the last 10 years. Under the Coastal Wetlands Planning, Protection, and Restoration Act, or CWIPRA, more than 80 restoration projects have been built or are under construction, and strategies such as freshwater diversions and barrier island restoration are being implemented. Nearly $400 million have been spent on restoration efforts in the 1990s. Under the Coast 2050 initiative, state, local, and federal officials are working with citizens to sustain a coastal ecosystem that supports and protects the environment, economy, and culture of southern Louisiana. Yet even with these aggressive measures, less than a quarter of the land projected to be lost by 2050 will be saved.
When we get these 80 projects on the ground, we may be taking care of only 15 or 20% of the problem. Probably 20% would be a good result. Well, then we still got 80% left. Well, hopefully we've learned enough in that 20% to be able to really design efficient, effective projects to take care of the 80%.
We've learned a whole lot about the system. We've learned that we can do small projects, but we've also learned that now it's time to implement large-scale projects.
One of the problems with coastal restoration is the amount of time it takes to complete a project. The construction process can be slow, and the bureaucratic process can be even slower. But many projects have brought very positive results. The Carnarvon freshwater diversion, expected to preserve over 16,000 acres of marsh during the next 50 years, has exceeded expectations. The Davis Pond diversion is expected to be completed in 2001 and will help preserve 33,000 acres of wetlands in the Barataria Terrebonne system. Barrier Island projects have helped restore islands such as Whiskey, Trinity, and Raccoon. Christmas tree and vegetation programs help protect shorelines and trap vital sediments. Yet with all of these efforts, there is still a dire need for more restoration. If systems like Barataria Terrebonne are to be saved, large-scale projects will have to be undertaken. Many more projects will have to be implemented. Multiple strategies will have to be used because no one type will solve the problem. Scientists have learned through the last 10 years of restoration that diversions hold out the most hope in reducing land loss.
We have lots of techniques that we need to use to save our coast. But by far the most important one is using the Mississippi River and specifically diverting river water into the coastal system during spring. And this river water, which carries a huge load of sediments during the spring, is what we need to get into the coast to save this national treasure.
But there are large hurdles to clear in building a diversion. A suitable site must be chosen. Permits must be acquired. Legal issues must be answered. Bids for construction must be submitted. Flooding issues must be resolved. And ultimately, some people may have to relocate.
If we really want something to happen within the next 10 or 15 years in relation to diversions, we have to start acting now. It's not an easy thing to do. We have highways to go across, we have railways to go across, we have hurricane protection issues, flood protection issues to take care of. These are not insurmountable problems, but diversions are not going to happen quickly.
Everybody wants to restore the coast, but everybody wants the guy next door to be the one who's inconvenienced. And the other thing is, I think we have to make sure that if someone is going to have a diversion that comes through their backyard or a project that affects the way they live, that you deal with them fairly. And that would be a change.
There is also the issue of how diversions impact fisheries. Movement of excessive amounts of fresh water through oyster leases will stunt the growth and reproduction of the oysters. Many of these leases have been in the same family for several generations, and without question, diversions will have an impact on their ability to earn a living. A fair and just compensation agreement must be reached before a diversion project begins.
The diversion project is absolutely needed. Building the coast barrier islands is absolutely needed. And it's just the little nitty-gritty things that have to be worked out in between. How do we best do it to have the least amount of loss to anyone?
One of the biggest oppositions to diversions is the issue of water quality, particularly of the Mississippi River. Large amounts of nutrients introduced to a system could lead to harmful algae blooms. Nutrient-rich water encourages organism growth, sometimes to a level that the system is not capable of supporting. When these organisms begin to die, their decomposition uses large quantities of oxygen. Other plants and animals can no longer survive in the oxygen-depleted water, leading to events such as fish kills.
It would make little sense to restore a wetland and ignore the water quality problems and the fish and wildlife problems. So this has to be an integrated effort that extends throughout all of the watersheds that feed down into these systems.
Since the passage of the Clean Water Act in the early 1970s, the quality and monitoring of the Mississippi has improved. Some scientists feel that it is not a toxic soup or a river of death. In fact, for the wetlands of Louisiana, it may be the river of life.
Putting Mississippi River water into the coastal zone of Louisiana, the beneficial effects are going to outweigh the negative effects. In other words, if you understand the problems in the river and you understand your management options, it is better to put the river into the marshes than not to do it at all.
According to experts, $14 billion will be needed over the next 20 years to restore and maintain coastal Louisiana. $14 billion to preserve Louisiana's culture, seafood, the oil and gas industry, and so much more. The technology to do it exists. Now, the citizens of Louisiana and the nation must decide if the price is worth the return. If the decision is made to restore coastal Louisiana, it must begin with the citizens and the state of Louisiana. Louisiana must be prepared to increase its commitment to coastal restoration efforts. Citizens must urge their elected officials to make this issue a priority.
We have to be prepared to make a commitment. If we're not prepared to save our state, why should anyone else?
To help fund coastal restoration, there is a movement underway to share a larger portion of the federal Outer Continental Shelf oil and gas revenues with coastal states. In 1998, the federal Treasury's take of OCS revenues was over $4 billion. But Louisiana received only a fraction of the funds paid to California or Florida. Yet oil and gas activity in Louisiana exceeded both states combined.
We could easily argue that the $100 billion plus that the federal government has received from OCS activity, of which Louisiana gets very little, almost nothing, we should get a percentage.
We don't think that's federal assistance. We think that's essentially an impact payment. By any system of justice and equity, we're entitled to a whole lot more than we're getting.
Louisiana has the most dynamic delta system in the United States, yet it is vanishing. We have the capability to reverse the trend, but time is running out. If it's decided the cost is too high, then we must prepare for the repercussions. If we decide to save it, then the process must begin now, in earnest. The decision made today will affect the nation's economy and the landscape of Louisiana tomorrow and forever.
This is an investment that we absolutely can't afford not to make.
If we don't decide to act soon, the decision will be made for us.
Our coastal wetlands are a national treasure. They also support a very unique culture. Their loss would be a tragedy to everybody.